Zootopia 2 is set to be released by Disney in November 2025, and it's sure to be a blast.
Ready to make the world a better place?
But did you know that the story of the first Zootopia movie, which was a worldwide success, was originally much darker and heavier than what we all saw and loved?
We can only solve it together.
Among all the things that would have been different in Zootopia, the main difference is that in the original versions of the film, all predators would be required to wear a control collar. Whenever a predator got angry, the collar would electrocute them to prevent them from attacking prey. The collar was a key element in the plot, as predators didn't really need it to stay in control. In other words, the collar was more of a way to control them. Additionally, there was a much bigger inequality between predators and prey in this version, with prey being more successful in society and treating predators like trash since they would be shocked whenever they got angry or felt strong emotions. Even simply being happy could be enough to trigger a shock. It's no wonder they removed this from the final movie, as it would have made the tone far too heavy for a children's film. But trust me, there are many more changes you'll see in this video. So get ready, because it's time for another episode of Cinewave. While the final version of the film focuses more on Judy Hops, the bunny police officer, the original version had Nick Wilde as the central character. In this version, he would still be the same trickster, but his business ventures wouldn't be going so well, as he would be living in a rundown apartment. As a predator, Nick would also have his shock collar. In a scene that was actually produced by Disney, we see Nick going to a medical clinic where his collar would be removed for a few seconds for a checkup. That's when he would realize how great it felt to be without the collar, even if only for a moment. He would even have a daydream about freedom. Because of what happens at the clinic, the protagonist would come up with the idea of creating an amusement park just for predators, where they could take off their collars and have fun. It would be both a way to make money and give his fellow predators a chance to feel free for a little while. Nick would try to get a loan from several different companies to gather enough money to create the park, but he'd be rejected multiple times. Eventually, he would only manage to get the money by borrowing from Koslov. In this version, the polar bear wouldn't be Mr. Big's henchman, but instead a powerful Russian mob boss. After that, Nick would finally manage to create the park. Since the only legal way to remove a predator's collar was for medical treatment, he would also set up a fake medical clinic as a front to get his customers collar free before taking them to the amusement park. Not long after, the protagonist would be caught by Koslov because he couldn't repay his debt on time. Fortunately, even in this darker version, Nick would manage to convince him to give him one more week to pay up. The park would soon become a hit once it opened, as every predator wanted to be collar-free, even if just for a little while, and Nick would eventually be able to pay off his debt. It's only after the park became successful that Judy Hops, who plays such a big role in the final version of Zootopia, would finally appear. She would still be the same motivated police officer as in the final version, and would start investigating the fake clinic to figure out why predators were visiting it so often, which would lead her to discover the secret park and become a thorn in Nick's side. Judy wouldn't become Nick's partner until much later. In fact, there would even be a moment where they'd visit Judy's big family and spend some time there, with Judy's siblings loving Nick. It would have been fun to see, as we didn't get to see much of her family in the final film, but that was probably cut because it would have made the movie too long. After all, there are too many bunnies for such limited screen time. So, are you excited for the release of Zootopia 2? If you are, leave a comment below with #bunny to honor Judy. One really interesting difference between this version of the movie and the one that hit theaters is the villain in Zootopia. Deputy Mayor Bellwether didn't even exist in this version of the movie, and the villain was actually Mayor Swinton, a pig obsessed with having the perfect face. The reason the creators thought of making the villain a pig was that pigs are among the smartest animals in the animal kingdom, so it made sense that a pig would have the ambition to dominate all of Zootopia. They likely replaced her with Bellwether to surprise the audience. Plus, the idea of a wolf in sheep's clothing is a bit more intriguing than a pig as a villain, wouldn't you agree? Also, Mayor Swinton would have been way more evil than Bellwether. It would have been impossible not to hate this villain, as she had a deep prejudice against predators, far worse than the final villain. Another difference Zootopia would have had is that Nick would be imprisoned after being infected by one of Swinton's henchmen with the same virus from the final version that makes predators go savage. His amusement park would be shut down by the cops after the incident, and there was nothing he could do about it. The media would then spread the lie that it happened because Nick wasn't wearing his shock collar, but the truth was that it was just part of the villain's plans to legalize the execution of predators. In prison, Nick would be forced to wear an even worse collar than the usual one, as its shock would be twice as powerful. It's hard to argue when people say this version of the story was way darker than what we got in Zootopia. Honestly, it's kind of a relief they changed this, because poor Nick didn't deserve all that suffering. After tricking Judy, Nick would manage to escape prison, sparking a chase scene between the two. Although this scene didn't happen this way in the final version, it did happen, but Nick was replaced by Duke Weaselton. That's right, that super funny scene where Judy chases after the weasel through Little Rodentia was originally a scene where she was chasing Nick, who had just escaped from prison after being framed. Pretty wild, huh? One character who was very different in this version of the movie is Dr. Mel Badger. While in the final version she's a doctor trying to create a cure for the virus making predators go savage, in this earlier version she was one of Nick's friends. She was a bit unhinged and believed in a conspiracy theory about sheep bringing about the apocalypse and taking over the world. Does that sound familiar? She even had a bunker to protect herself from the supposed end of everything. Knowing this makes me wonder if Bellwether hadn't been conceived yet. Could they have already been planning to use her as a villain in a sequel to show that this conspiracy had some truth to it? Another character cut from the final version of Zootopia was Wooly, although he was repurposed into Doug, Bellwether's accomplice. Wooly would have worked as a spy for Mayor Swinton, wearing a trench coat to disguise himself as a wolf. We always hear about a wolf in sheep's clothing, but this would have been the first time we'd see a sheep in wolf's clothing in a movie. There was also an elderly goat character who didn't have much relevance to the story. The idea was that she would be a veteran traffic guard, and Judy would be terrified of ending up like her when she got old, instead of becoming a successful cop. Now, one really important character that was also completely erased from the movie was Mr. Wilde, Nick's father. Like his son, he had tried in the past to start a business and failed multiple times to get a loan. In a really heavy scene, young Nick would have a rage-filled breakdown and be taken by the police, even though he was just a child. This would cause them to have to move to a new city, all because of prejudice against predators. If you're still watching the video, it means you liked it, so click the subscribe button to keep getting quality content. In the original version of Zootopia, not only was the villain supposed to be a pig mayor, but there were also other pigs in the group of antagonists. These were the Razorbacks, a special police squad made up of wild boars that worked as Mayor Swinton's bodyguards. Since boars are excellent sniffers, they would have been able to detect predators and stop them from attacking the mayor by surprise. They were scrapped when the movie's villain was changed to Bellwether because part of the joke was having a squad of boars serving a pig. Another interesting change is that in the original version, Nick would have escaped to Russia after breaking out of prison to ask Kozlov for help, with Judy following him. The mobster would start to believe that the two were working together and would kidnap both of them. This is where Nick and Judy would have teamed up, as they needed to work together to escape. As they try to flee without drawing attention, they end up passing through a domestication party Kozlov is throwing for his son, celebrating that the boy would now have to wear a shock collar like all predators once they reach a certain age. People at the party treat it as if it's a big deal, but everyone stops celebrating when the boy gets shocked simply for being too happy, and then he is hugged by his father. This is another really heavy scene that explains why the whole shock collar concept was dropped from the final version of the movie. Even though the final version of Zootopia still deals with prejudice, this earlier version would have taken it to a much deeper and darker level, which might have made it hard for kids to watch. I know I would have had a nightmare or two after seeing that movie. In the ending of the version we all saw, Bellwether tries to infect Nick with the virus that makes animals go savage, but she fails. In the original version, however, Nick actually gets infected with the virus again in front of everyone, but this time, he manages to control himself a bit in his savage state. Instead of attacking Judy, he uses his wild instincts to go after the bad guys and save his friend, showing that predators don't need the shock collars and that their wild instincts can be used to help others rather than harm prey. Afterward, predators no longer need the collars and are free, and Nick's park is reopened to be enjoyed by both predators and prey, who finally start to live in harmony, much like in the final version of the movie. I have to admit, this ending is also really beautiful. Maybe in the future, Disney will use some of the elements from this original version of Zootopia in another movie. It would be really interesting to see. To keep having fun, just click on one of the 2 videos that we've left on the screen. I'm sure you'll love them. Thanks, and see you next time.